everybody, and welcome to Coventry University's Centre for Trust, Peace and Social Relations webinar presentation today. I'm very pleased and excited that I can introduce you to Professor Jinghan Zeng from Lancaster University. Professor Zeng is Professor of China and International Studies at Lancaster. He's also Academic Director of China Engagement and Director of Lancaster University Confucius Institute. Professor Zeng has published numerous articles and books on a range of topics, including a book called Artificial Intelligence with Chinese Characteristics, National Strategy, Security and Authoritarian Governance, and another called Slogan Politics, Understanding Chinese Foreign Policy Concepts. I think Professor Zeng is one of the foremost experts on China and international relations who is working in the UK at the moment. And so I was very keen to invite him to come along and to give us his reflections on the 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, which took place last month. And so what I will do now is I will hand over to Professor Zeng to talk. After Professor Zeng gives his presentation, there will be some time for Q&A, so feel free to either raise your hand or if you want to put your question in the chat box. Either option is fine, and we'll have some time at the end to discuss some of the issues that Professor Zeng is discussing today. So I'll hand this over to you now, Professor Zeng.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the nice introduction, and thank you for having me. I'm very delighted actually to join the event, and thank you everybody for being here. Right, so yeah, I would like to thank the Center for Trust, Peace and Social Relations at Coventry University for organizing this event. I think the key thing we are going to think about today is mainly about reflection of the 20th Party Congress. That was quite something that a lot of people are talking about in the past few weeks. I think it's good timing as we're doing it now, because we're staying away from that whole discussion, and now probably we can have some calm and reflection on what happened and what was being predicted, what wasn't being predicted. So I'm trying to reflect on several things, and also being asked by the organizer on several things, I think, which are very important. First of all, is a bit of reflection of the leadership lineup. Most importantly, I think previously, before this 20th Party Congress final leadership lineup was released, there was considerable kind of prediction on who might be appointed as a new premier, who might be appointed into Politburo Standing Committee, who might be appointed into Politburo members. And there were different kind of media analysis, different kind of media come out with their own lineup, and also different kind of China expert to predict about this lineup as well. So as something I want to talk about. And the second topic is about China's zero COVID policy, reflecting on this 20th Party Congress. What might be the direction of travel for China's zero COVID policy in the future? And are we really being seeing a shift, or China is doubling down on its zero COVID policy? This is obviously very important, because the stock market has been paying close attention on this matter, and there are billions of dollars in stake regarding this. And the third topic is Russia. I want to talk about Russia side as well. I think that has been heavily discussed in this country and in Europe. Given the war and China's role with Russia, what might be the future direction of travel? Will China continue to align with Russia, or China will keep its distance? And the first topic will be Taiwan. This is not something I will usually talk about, because I don't think anything significantly changed, which I'll explain later. But it's something that people are interested in now, given the debate. And building on these four main aspects, I will talk about the wider role of China, which is a China challenge, and how China should better live with the rest of the world, and how the West general maybe best approach, engage with China. So this will be the 5 main points I'm going to talk about today. So please bear with me. First of all, first question is leadership lined up. I'm sure that many of you probably have seen lots of predictions about who might be appointed as a new Chinese leader or Chinese premier. There was different kind of rumors on who might stay, who might left, and who might become the new premier, sorts of that. I think what I have been showing here is one example. And a lot of that is actually what we call the China criminology in China studies. And the media, it's not only media, but also a lot of experts has come out to give labels on a specific Chinese leader. So you can often see examples about this leader are being considered as pro-liberal, that leader is considered as pro-business, and this leader is considered as pro-conservative. And in many cases, some of the way the label were given were based on 1 or 2 policies that was being implemented. For example, the leader of Shanghai was giving a label of pro-conservative because of the zero COVID policy implemented in Shanghai, and the opponent was given a label of pro-business. But to me, much of those label of pro-business, pro-liberal, conservative does not really make a lot of sense, and I don't think they are accurate. If you really go back to 2012, when the 18th Party Congress were taking place, you will find very interestingly at that time, different kind of label were given to different kind of Chinese leaders. For example, the Chinese leader Li Keqiang, who now has been given a pro-business or even pro-liberal, and his faction often been talked about as Chinese Communist League, has often been given by the existing analysis as a pro-business, pro-liberal kind of label. But actually, back in 2012, a very different label was given to them. They were considered as a pro-conservative one, with the other side was considered as pro-liberal one. So the point to make here is the way we give a specific Chinese leader certain labels as believe that they believe in a certain policy preference often make no sense. And the predictions based on those kind of label or based on kind of rumors, a lot of them are actually guesswork. So the question here is really how much we know what a specific Chinese leader really believe in. I think that's something need to be questioned. A lot of analysis is actually guesswork. I think currently a lot of discussion we're saying this leader has been working in this province for how long, and this province, for example, in Fujian or in coastal area of China, which is usually market economy play a larger role. So this leader must be pro-liberal or pro-business or pro-market. And that leader has been working in the party system for how long and raise reason from this party system. So that leader is more pro-conservative. But a lot of that actually, I think, are based on guesswork. We don't really know what specific Chinese leader believes because they don't necessarily talk about it. And second is, even if they have a specific policy beliefs on certain area, but politicians who have to bear in mind are very pragmatic as well. They have to be reactive to the political events through into them. So many cases, their personal political beliefs perhaps does not really matter that much than the kind of external circumstances. So all of that make to the point that I think any prediction or analysis of the lineup we should be very careful about. And second is if we view the current lineup of the 20th Party Congress as pro-conservative or pro-business and make any decision based on that, I think that need to be questioned. So there is no predictable future for China. I think what will happen to those leaders and what they are going to implement, what kind of policies they are going to implement, is based on not only what they personally believes, but also what happened in China. So that's about China's leadership lineup. And the second major aspect I want to talk about is China's zero COVID policy. Obviously, we have seen doubling down of zero COVID policy in China before the 20th Party Congress. And this is very important because every single time before the leadership transition, you can say 17th Party Congress, 18th Party Congress, 19th Party Congress, 20th Party Congress. It's always the case. About half a year or 100 days before the event, I think there are emphasis on stability. And I think the famous words is always stability overrides everything, right? So that's normal. But I think a lot of guessing work happens on whether there will be a shift after the 20th Party Congress. And I think the stock market has been nervously looking into this development and trying to identify any sign of it. Because if China has eventually decided to losing up its zero COVID policy, it's going to bring a very different message to the financial market and will affect about China's stock, the shares of Chinese stock market. But I think very often, either for those who believe zero COVID will stay, or for those who believe zero COVID should go, I think they has been ignoring, or probably it's part of the translation issue. What happens in China, or the China's official policy has never been zero COVID. It's dynamic zero COVID. So what does dynamic zero COVID means? If you strictly implement the policy, then it's zero COVID. But you can also interpret in other ways, which into a dynamic zero COVID means that there are considerable rooms for the government to justify a way or approach getting away from the zero COVID policy, which I will explain later. So the current dynamic zero COVID policy, what has been happening is it has become now a slogan, which has been interpreted quite differently by Chinese ministries, departments, province, cities, counties, or even districts. And we have seen, for example, in Chongqing, which now recently has been seeing lockdown, and in comparison with the city of Shijiazhuang, and it has been showing a clear kind of loosening up or getting away from zero COVID and restoring its COVID test points, point size, etc. You can see very different kind of patterns, and you can see a wide range of regional variation in different Chinese provinces about how different province has been interpreting the zero COVID policy and how they has been implementing those policies as well. There are quite range of difference here. And what really this shows us to China study community is a Chinese style of federalism, in which there are very interesting central local interactions and a kind of backlinks between the center and local area, and also kind of policy experimentations. I think what will happen in China when they gradually losing up the zero COVID policy, certain kind of cities or regions maybe choose as a pilot cities to do the experimentation of what might be happening and to get some lessons nationally in order to implement those policy at national level. I think that is very likely what is going to happen in the next few months' time. And why? A lot of people were asking the question of why China continue to stick to the zero COVID policy instead of losing up immediately after the 20th Party Congress. And actually, I would argue there is a kind of backfire of the previous kind of narrative. In the past, in order to secure the public compliance, the propaganda has been telling people a narrative that there will be long COVID, and the COVID is very dangerous, it's quite bad, we don't understand it, it might lead to considerable kind of amount of death rate. And a lot of Chinese people have been receiving the information of hundreds of thousands of people have died because of COVID in the US, because of COVID in Europe. So that narrative has really been there, being bought by the public and who believe COVID is something very dangerous. And that helps, in the past few years, help the government to implement the zero COVID policy, but now lead to a backfire. The backfire are two ways. One is it has created a past dependency that people continue to believe that this is something serious. So there was strong opposition to the shift away from zero COVID. And the second backfire is a lot of people now, what you have seen in the picture on the right, is a World Cup in Qatar. A lot of people who has been watching the World Cup were asking the question, are we really living in the same universe? And why in China, in the picture on the left, you can see the empty streets, zero COVID, and looks very serious. It's something that look like something very serious happening. But on the right, in the same world, you can get so many people come together, celebrating, enjoying themselves without even a mask. And a lot of them will be questioning what went wrong and why China is so different, why China cannot have the kind of crowd, cannot go out to celebrate and enjoy our life, and we have to choose this way. So this has led to a kind of backfire regarding the previous kind of government narrative. Clearly, you can say opponents and supporters in this kind of debate, and I think that the same thing has been happening in the UK, same thing has been happening in Europe, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But I think the point here is the government have to make a dedicated kind of balance over how to gradually loosen up China's zero COVID policy, at the same time maintain a stable social order. And that is going to be very, very challenging. And this is why the Chinese government do not want to probably escalate the process too much. And what it has been worrying about is a large amount of kind of people going to the hospital, that hospital system cannot really meet the demand. I think that's the same thing happening in other places as well. And second thing, in affecting this zero COVID policy is financial sustainability. Imagining that so many people, millions of people have to take a daily test and all paid by the taxpayer, that is not something financially sustainable. So this is why now a lot of kind of the burden will left to the local governments to take it over. And that has been creating different kind of challenge for the local governments. In some of the local governments in richer area, like Shenzhen or like Guangzhou, they are more capable of taking over this kind of financial burden. But in other area like Shijiazhuang or like in Zhengzhou, I think which are financially less affordable of those kind of tests, you can see that they have to give up some of the strict net zero COVID policy than before. You can really again see the regional variation in this regard. And most importantly, I think in addition to stable social order, financial sustainability, I think we are going to see, and the government have to find a way to justify why China adopt the strict zero COVID policy in the past, and has to justify why this policy were not wrong. Because currently a lot of critiques on that has been saying we shouldn't be adopting that, and there were a lot of mistakes caused by this policy, a lot of problems caused by this policy. In China, we have often hearing social media on how pregnant kind of ladies were not able to see a doctor because of zero COVID policy, or people suicide because has been locking down for quite a long time, or very young kind of 2 or 3 years old children who eventually died even without being able to see a doctor in time because of this zero COVID policy. So I think ultimately the government need to find a justification to explain why the past policy were correct and they were made correct, and why it is now time for us to move on. And often what happens with this kind of U-turn, as we have seen in different places, is you have to acknowledge the mistake made in the past in order to justify why we need a U-turn now. But I think the challenge for the current Chinese government is you have to justify why the past policy were not wrong. At the same time, you have to explain why we need to move on and choose a new policy. And this is something can be quite challenging as well. And regarding the third topic on Taiwan, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, honestly, I really think that this shouldn't be something attract so many attentions. I think perhaps the current attention, a lot of discussion on the issue of Taiwan has been created. Is Nancy Pelosi's visit, and China has been doubling up, saying there will be consequences of it. I think that's something that attract attention. And also Russia, I think the war between Russia and Ukraine has been rising up a lot of discussion or analysis, or even guess, well, what will happen if there is a war in Taiwan Strait. And ultimately, we all know the geopolitical context or geopolitical tension of it. That is something has been hyping up the crisis in Taiwan. But if you really go deep into what has been happening now, and look into what has been happening in the past 40 years or 50 years, and the question is very simple. Is there any fundamental change of China's Taiwan policy? And obviously the answer is no. If you look into the 20th Party Congress report, you'll find that very little has been changed regarding China's Taiwan policy. China continued to say we need to unify with Taiwan, and obviously peaceful unification will be the main approach. But at the time, China do not want to give up all other alternative kind of solutions. That has always been something that China has been talking about for decades. And now I think a lot of media analysis talking about it as if there's something new, or as if a war is coming to us. That has been clearly exaggerated, the kind of situation. And we have to understand that it's not like China has been coming out with new ideas or with a war solution. What has been happening in the current mainland China and Taiwan situation was a legacy of the civil war between the Nationalist Party and Chinese Communist Party. At the same time, two different regimes, the People's Republic of China and Republic of China. I'm going to bear in mind, back in then, it's not that People's Republic of China claim the entire China territory, but also Republic of China. If you went into the regime in Taiwan, Republic of China, according to its constitution, Mongolia is still part of its territory, and it has been abandoning that kind of claim until 2005. So the point is, it was a legacy back in the Civil War, and you got two parties, two sides, both of them want to unify China. And because of its legacy of a war, so the military options were clearly on the table. And what has really been changed is Taiwan side, that it has a regime change, and with a new identity in the past 2 decades, with a new identity of Taiwan and democratization, all of that has changed, that make Taiwan less and less interested or lose its attention to unify China. At the same time, the PRC side has not really been changing its rhetoric, hasn't really been changing what it really wants. So that has been leading in the situation. And then this leads to a question of how serious is the current kind of crisis, or what we have been talking about Taiwan. I wouldn't even call it a crisis. If you compare Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan and the response from People's Republic of China, you'll find it's really not a crisis in comparison with what happened the first Taiwan Strait crisis back in 1954, the second Taiwan Strait crisis in 1958, the third Taiwan Strait crisis in 1998. This is not even a crisis, and so this is why I think we have been hyping up the threat from China for quite a long time, and does not really make a lot of sense to me. And especially now, a lot of discussion saying that this, or as if this might be happening very soon, and this will bear policy consequences. A lot of complain when they make decisions about investment in East Asia, or in Taiwan, or in mainland China, or the states trying to talking about China, understand China. They will be make decisions on as if this something is happening, but this is not happening, and China has not really been changing its policy. Something has been there for quite a long time. So we should really be, I think the media or international community talking about this issue should really calm down and look into this matter. You'll find that China's rhetoric has never been changed. So is China's solution towards this issue. And what might be the best for the region, for the United States, for China, is to maintain the status quo. But what you have really been seeing is that the US has been quietly changing its policy towards Taiwan. It has been getting away from the so-called strategic ambiguity. The Biden's comments on defending Taiwan, I think that's not something has been previously talked about. You can see clearly conflicting messages come from the President of the United States and its relevant office dealing with this matter. And obviously, you have a lot of high-profile visits from United States to go to Taiwan. That will clearly encourage the independence movement in Taiwan. And is that really good? I think my worry will be that if when we further getting away from status quo, it will further provoke China, and this might be good for the benefits of individual politicians, but I don't think this is good for Taiwan or for the United States or for the region. So what might be the best is really to keeping a low profile, maintain the status quo. That will be the best for the regional peace, and leave this problem to be solved in the future. But unfortunately, I think the direction of this kind of it's not really the direction of travel on the issue of Taiwan. And in addition to Taiwan, I think another hot topic has been recently talked about a lot is Russia. I think especially in Western media, I think a lot of discussion on how Russia-China relation without limits. I think that fundamentally really has been misinterpreting this bilateral relations. If you look into what the Chinese position is, I think as quoted here, China firmly advocates respecting and safeguarding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Ukraine issue. At the same time, China believes that Russia's legitimate security demands should be taken seriously and addressed properly. You can see a clear kind of line China is working between Russia and Ukraine. And many analysts has been interpreting this as China's strategic ambiguity. What does this mean? This means that China is looking for long-term direct and indirect opportunities from this crisis in Ukraine. But what I would argue will be it's what China, instead of a strategic ambiguity, what China is doing now is what I call passive ambiguity. And this is less about strategic, it's more about passive. Because China, at this time within China, there is lack of consensus and understanding about the war and its potential implications. And we often talk about how China has been standing closely with Russia. I think in a way, yes, Russia is an important ally. But what has been often missing is the opposition within China about a close China-Russia relations. You got different kind of stakeholders, Chinese stakeholders in Russia or in Ukraine, and you got Chinese transnational state-owned enterprise who are worried about Western sanctions if China get too close with Russia, and you got those who are worried about China's relation with the West because of Russia, and you got those liberal forces in China who simply do not like Russia or what Russia is doing, and their voice has often been ignored when we come to approach about China's position. And if you really compare that, you'll find very interestingly, China-Russia relation is called no limits partnership. But China has a very good relation with Ukraine as well. It's called China-Ukraine semi-strategic partnership. So this is not something very serious, China's relation with Ukraine, and often has been less talked about. And Ukraine has a strategic, is based in a geographical important place. It is a key partner of China's Belt and Road Initiative. And China is Ukraine's largest trading partner. And what Russia has been doing in Ukraine does not really fit in China's principle of national sovereignty. This is why China clearly wants to keep some distance. And if you will look into the Russia-China relation, you can say, yes, Russia offers considerable political value or strategic values to China because it distracts the West to some extent and agree with China on many issues. However, and most importantly, Russia does not really offer considerable economic values to China. China's exports to EU and UK is almost 10 times than Chinese exports to Russia, right? Russia is a very small economy, so which can offer China energy, which is great, but in comparison with China's size, what Russia can offer to China in comparison with EU or United States can offer to China are very little in economic sense. So within China, there is considerable kind of opposition saying that Russia does not really worth China to getting too close with it and being sanctioned by the West. So recently, there is a lot of media talking about how Xi Jinping has stand out and talking about China is against the use of threat of nuclear weapons. And is that new position? I think that's not. That's always the position that China has been having. So the point you're making here is, when we talk about China, I think it's always black or white. It's standing with Russia or it's against Russia. I think it's not. It has never closely aligned with Russia on this issue. And now it will not fundamentally isolate Russia and cut up all China's support to Russia on this matter. What China really wants, or probably China will do, is standing a middle point. And this goes into the nature of China-Russia relation. In a way, you can call it a marriage of convenience. And much of this marriage is shaped by who? It's not by Russia, not by China. It's shaped by the Western pressure. The more Western pressure put in both countries, the closer those two will be. And now there's a lot of argument, or a lot of like people are wondering, right? So now China is keeping some distance with Russia. China is saying that we are against the threat of nuclear weapons. And the question is, can China help? Or can China be the one mediate the situation? Or eventually, can China get away from Russia, or help the West to defeat Russia? And a lot of discussion of that, I think, has been cynical in Chinese social media. A lot of them has been summarizing the Western request as, can you help me to fight your friends so that I can concentrate on fighting you later? Right? I think that's a good description of the situation. Then if China wants to come out and mitigate the situation, or wants to come out, help the West to do something or pressure Russia, then the legitimate question, or the consequent question to be asked, is what is this for? How China can benefit from this, right? Let's say if China helps the West to, or change its position regarding Russia, will it significantly improve China's relation with the West? I think the answer is obviously no, because the tensions now caused between China and the United States and with many other European countries is not only about Russia. Russia is clearly one thing, but also other things as well. So there are very little China can benefit from by doing this. And this is why China is reluctant to do that. But if we continue to see increasing Western pressure on this matter, I think it's going to be a key variable to push China closer to Russia. And this leading to my last point, thing I want to talk about is how eventually we can engage with China, right? I think this is something has been talked about a lot in United States. The argument goes that engagement strategy is something Washington has been implementing for decades, and that has failed. So now Washington should choose a new way to deal with China, which is containment, confrontation. We should speak out, call China out, and confront China, right? And I think this argument has fundamentally problematic. If you really go back to it, many politicians in the US will be saying that, you know, in the past few decades, we have been closely working with China, engaged with China, welcome China into the international community, and hope that China will change and socialize with us, and that we eventually share our values, be integrated into the world. However, what we have been doing is welcoming China to the system. At the same time, nothing has changed in China, and China has been manipulating this system to develop its economy and now become an enemy that has been so powerful than we engaged with them before. So now it's time for us to confront China. But this argument has been problematic in many ways. If you really go back to say, back in then, why the United States make diplomatic relations with People's Republic of China, you'll find that go back to Nixon's time is regarding how the United States can use China to fight against USSR. And that has led the China-Soviet splits. And that's bring considerable strategic gains for the United States, so that the US actually benefit significantly from working with China. And if you look into more recent times in early 2000s of how China has been integrated into WTO, into the world system, I think clearly Western company has significantly benefited from China financially, economically. And the argument that nothing has changed from China, I think that's fundamentally misunderstood what has happened in China. If you go back to before China's reform and open up, you don't really have so many Chinese people study in the West. But now you can see lots of Chinese students study in the United States, study in the UK, and before the pandemic, lots of tourists traveling around the world, trying to understand the world. And China has been changing, changing slowly. But what has been happening is the Western world, especially the United States, has lost its patience and has been, I think, also has the wrong assumption that what China needs to become is to become one of Western liberal democracies. I think that's never been the direction of travel and never been the goal. And it might not be good for China as well, but does not mean that China cannot be integrated into the global society. China cannot live peacefully with other countries and work with other countries to solve the global issues. But I think currently there is a lot more focus on geopolitical confrontation, and we often forget about the benefit of engagement and forget about how important China is as an international community member in order to fight against climate change, in order to deal with a wide range of transnational cooperation issues. So ultimately, what you have seen is, I think the United States has been helping China's hawkish to do a lot of things. What is more recent movement is the US cheap sanctions over China. And the question, if you ask, is who benefits from it? I think we shouldn't really view China as one single coherent entity. Within China, you got the pro-engagement kind of voice who believe that China should have a good relation with the US, with the rest of the world, should open up, should be integrated into the rest of the world, should be cooperative. On the other side, you also got the hawkish in China who are nationalist as well. And this US cheap sanction really helped those hawkish who believe that any reliance on foreign technology a security risk, and who believe in we should further support Made in China 2025. What has been happening in the United States give them powerful reasons to say we should continue that path. And who lose from the situation within China? Those who support transnational corporations, those believe that China should be integrated into the world and integrated into supply chain. Those believe that dependence on Western countries is not necessarily a bad thing, because China is a member of the international community. China should not view the United States or other countries as its enemy. Those people or those kind of forces were the one who has been significantly punished by this US cheap sanctions. And that's very clear. So ultimately, I think we should really be thinking about the policy consequences before we come out to say, how are we going to engage with China, or how are we going to contain with China? I think that's something should be thinking carefully. I think that currently discussion, a lot of them has been dominated by those hawkish kind of views, talking about how can we fight China harder, or how can we defeat China. And often, I think those hawkish views has been expressing sentiment, but without any rationale. And for those people who believe China is an immediate threat, which might become more and more threatening in the future, are often the same cohort of people who are saying that China's political system is very problematic, are saying that the Communist Party is not sustainable. But there are fundamental kind of contradictions within those two logics. If the political system in China is not sustainable, why in the long run is going to be a threat? Then you don't have to do anything, right? So there are fundamental kind of problems within its logic. So to summarize what I'm trying to say regarding the China strategy, I think the more pressure Washington and Europe and the West in general to put on China, that will push China closer to Russia, to Iran, and to North Koreans. And often those consequences has been ignored. And it seems to me that now engagement with China has lost its appealing, has become now even politically incorrect to be talked about or debated about in Washington, in London, and in many places. And I think the consequences of that is clear, but it's not being fully understood. So ultimately, I think the question of the China challenge is how the West should be working with China that is become more and more important in the world. And I think too many Chinese, what has been happening now is the Western trying to contain the rise of China, but to many of them that the China's rise is given is not something can be changed by external forces. And we're going to see whether that might be the cause. And I think much of that argument or that logic depends on the continued growth of Chinese economy. Right. Okay. So I think I'm going to stop here. I've been talking about for 40 minutes. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zeng. This was very comprehensive, very, very interesting. And